How are you, Miss Connie?
I am awesome. Yourself?
Doing well, doing well. Trying to figure things out here.
Oh, what's the weather like up in Wichita Falls?
It's windy, pretty chilly. It's been super nice the last few days. It's been like springtime, summer weather.
Yeah,
It's
that's what it's been here.
crazy. Yeah, today was kind of cooler. I mean, it was still beautiful outside. A little cooler. Wind was blowing pretty good.
Hello.
Hi, sweetie.
Hello.
What's your name?
Gracie.
Say it right.
Gracie.
Gracie. Is that what she said?
Yeah, Gracie.
Gracie. I love that name.
Thank you.
Oh, Mr. Robert, how are you?
I'm good, brother. I'm a little weary, but I'm good.
Good.
Did a turnaround trip to Charlotte, North Carolina.
Oof.
Yeah.
Do you have family up there?
No work. Flew up Tuesday, dinner meeting, then a session that ran from 8 till 2 yesterday afternoon. Then my plane was on time, but then it wasn't on time because the FAA's system decided to go to sleep.
Oh, yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, it was a mess. My heart went out to all the people that, had connecting flights, and, it was whether or not they were going to be able to catch them was anybody's guess. So fortunately for me, it was direct. So I just didn't get home as early as I had hoped. So I think I pulled in the driveway about 20 minutes till 11 last night.
Then you have to unwind to go to sleep.
Unwind to go to sleep, and then turn around and get up first thing and go to work. So
Yeah.
y'all forgive me if I'm not my same ornery self tonight.
Mm-hmm.
I might be quieter. Y'all might actually enjoy it.
Yeah, there's times it's like, I just need to quit talking. It's like it's hard to just sit here.
I'm like at every class session.
Hello, everyone.
Hi,
Hey, brother.
Hello,
Just-
sir.
Just missing Lucas, I guess. He might join us here soon. I haven't heard anything from him. Unless he said something about being gone.
I don't remember it.
Yeah. That might be the case. All right. Well, good to see everyone. And we're winding down here. After tonight, we have one more gathering next Thursday, and then we'll be done with this part of it. And encourage everyone to make sure, if you haven't already paid for the course, that you go ahead and take care of that. And then I'll submit that you completed it when I get all the assignments are turned in. So that just depends on how long that takes. So, all right. Well, let's just start with a word of prayer and then dive on in. Lord, we thank you for this time together, and we pray you'll use this material to equip us in our ministry and our calling, to live lives that are pleasing to you and that reflects the gospel and your image well. And just pray you will speak to us tonight, and just pray you be glorified in all that we say and do. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right, so we're moving on to lesson 17, integrity and confidentiality within the church. And then we'll do number 18. And this is part of Unit 5, Ethical Decision Making and Contemporary Issues. And it's interesting to see as I'm going through this how the things that have become a reality since the writing of this lesson, or all these lessons, with of course, the legalizing of same-sex marriage federally, and then the federal, the abolishing of the Roe v. Wade, which, it's amazing what things have happened and that things that people were pushing for and got, and things that have changed. Well, so we're looking here at integrity and confidentiality within the church. And as far as the world goes, it often operates out of deceit. And to seem is better than to be for many in the world. There's this case with the man that was elected as a representative for New York, who apparently lied about his education and lied about his work. And there's effort to get him to step down and step aside. But, and some of those who could be asking for that are maybe being deceptive as well. We don't know. But it does cost. It does cost you. Well, and so with the church, the moral failures of high-profile ministers have contributed to a distrust of ministers. And the purpose of this lesson is to examine the integral nature of integrity and confidentiality in the pastoral ministry, and for that matter, for all life. And coming off our last lesson that dealt with sexuality or sexual integrity, morality dictates that one act with integrity regarding sexual relationships. The most basic level of sexual or such integrity is honesty and accountability. Evil presents itself in life primarily as self-deception. It is relatively easy to tell yourself this is appropriate or justified, but integrity requires that honesty prevail. This is evident in sexual matters, but it is also apparent in broader concerns as well. And the point of this lesson is a look at integrity in a much broader way. So the objectives of this lesson is for us to define the moral significance of integrity, articulate the parameters and the importance of confidentiality, understand and teach ethical theories and nurture ethical behavior in the church, discern and make theologically based ethical decisions in the midst of a complex and or paradoxical context. And lastly, apply Christian ethics to the issue of integrity of the minister and the congregation for authentic Christian faithfulness and public witness. So we have, of course, another scenario as a way to get our feet wet for this lesson. And so let me just lay that out to you. We start with Pastor Stan Hill, who is the senior pastor of a thriving suburban church. And about 2 years prior, he called Morris Brown to be his youth pastor. Since Morris's wife is a Christian counselor, she was employed part-time to lighten the load of the pastor. The first year and a half was a joyous time of ministry for Pastor Hill and Morris Brown, along with Morris's wife. But about 6 months ago, trouble began to emerge, first in small ways, then in more evident ways. The problem began when it was discovered that Morris Brown's son, so Morris was the associate, the youth pastor, his son, who's 14, had gotten involved with a girl in the youth group who is 17. The girl, Jane, was now pregnant. Morris feels his son was seduced by the older girl, and he wants the church to censure her and her family. The church is quickly choosing sides on this matter. Pastor Hill feels that while this is a difficult moment in the life of the church, in the life of Brown's family, it is also a time for ministry to both Jane and Brown's son. So much of the problem is that Morris's wife has been in a counseling relationship with Jane and some of her friends for 2 years. As the counselor, she knows certain things about Jane and some of her friends. One day when Susan, a friend of Jane's, came for counseling, Morris's wife verbally attacked her and threatened to divulge certain confidential information to her parents because Susan had not sided with her family, with the Browns. While Pastor Hill is sympathetic to the pain Mrs. Brown feels, he is concerned she is allowing her personal pain to compromise her professional responsibility. On top of this, Morris Brown has long wanted to become a senior pastor himself, but Mrs. Brown was too attached to the church and would not consider leaving. So Morris allowed this situation to unravel in order to convince his wife that it is time to leave the church. He asked Pastor Hill for a week off so he can interview and preach a trial sermon in a small church. During that next week, Morris decides to take the church and resigns to the board, saying he does not know what he's going to do, but the time has come to leave. All of this leaves Pastor Hill looking like an uncaring pastor and the church looking unconcerned for the future of the Brown family. Considering the issue of integrity and confidentiality, what should Pastor Hill do? Does anyone first have any questions about the scenario? Did you feel like you understood it? Who's with who and all that?
Carlos is going to start.
Oh, is he?
There's a
Who wants to
lot.
tackle this? Who wants to tackle this?
So, man, there's a lot going on in this thing.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the integrity thing, I mean, oh boy. There's just, I mean, I think both sides are battling with it, struggling with it, definitely. I think with the, who is it, Mrs. Morris? Is that her name?
Yeah.
Mrs. Morris? Okay, with the confidentiality, I mean,
Yeah.
man, you can't sacrifice your professional, for some kids. I'm sorry. I'm not gonna say we deal with that a lot, but there's a lot. Sorry for the screaming. There are times when things just hit you different and they get you different, and you want to strong arm that person, or kind of sway them to they see your side or whatever. But it's I just there's no excuse for busting confidentiality. If that is your profession and that's what you're being charged with and that's your ethics and that's your code of conduct, whatever it may be, man, you have there should be no reason why you're yelling at a 13-year-old and like, I can tell your parents some things about you, like that, like that's just wrong all the way around. Right. And to pick sides and who needs to be where and whatnot. So yikes. Yeah, this is Pastor Hill needs to do some major praying. Definitely needs to do some major praying.
Yeah.
I think who was it? Who's looking for the senior pastor? Is Mr. Morris, right?
Yeah, the associate, the husband of the counselor.
That's right. So he was looking for a senior pastor, but she doesn't want to leave because she's involved. I think as a senior pastor with things that are going on, I mean, you know, whatever happened with the two kids, you know, their son and the girl, you know, man, you can pray through that. You can work through that. That's a small thing, but I think it's just, I'm not going to say small, but you know, with the confidentiality thing, that's minuscule to what's going on. You know, I just think that, you know, they're going to have a sit down and, hey, listen, this is probably not the right move for you.
Yeah.
I know if it was me sitting in that senior pastoral spot, that's going to be a call to the district superintendent.
Mhm.
And I was like, yo, help me out, man. I don't know what to do here. Apparently there's a bunch of things going on that, you know, that I keep put him in the loop and at least get it, or at least, you know, a close mentor or something like that. And just like, at least bounce the ideas off of somebody to help out with it. And maybe they can see it from a different perspective and be like, oh yeah, just do this. And you're like, oh man, I didn't even think about that. You know, and it's, I think at this point in time, nothing's going to be easy per se.
Yeah.
So that's about all I got.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. Anyone else?
I do want to add, and I do think that the woman breaking her confidentiality, it's from the profession, that's the number one big no-no, the first thing. But as a senior pastor and you've hired, I'm sorry, I have a dog at the door. If y'all can hear the barking, I don't know if you can hear it or not, but the youth pastor that's wanting to be a senior pastor, but it's really his wife that's anchored him there. But then he lies to the board.
Right.
I think the senior pastor, out of love for this youth pastor who's now wanting, you know, being called to another church, just kind of, I'm gonna call it lovingly, rebukes him, because this is an integrity issue that throughout the rest of his time, is he going to do that? You know, he's already, if you're going to lie about that, when it's been a deep desire, and you ask permission to go and interview, but now you're going to tell the church and the board something different. That's just, I don't know. It just lays a foundation for the future. I think he owes it to him to not back off. Encourage him to tell the board the truth. You know, about where he was, what he's called to. He already has a job. It's not that he doesn't know what to do. As well as encouraging the church itself that this is an opportunity to show mercy to both of those young people. If it was the 17-year-old girl who'd gotten seduced by an older boy, they would be breaking the law, you know, because she would be the victim. 17-year-old is still considered, you know, a child, if you want to call it that maybe so, maybe she was, but that's still, you don't throw out one and save the other just because it's the pastor's kid. You don't. You know, it's how do you show love? That would be a really difficult position when pastor, I can't remember what their names were, when they have tried to get people to take sides. That's even another issue to talk to them about. You don't try to cause division, even though it's a personal pain. Anyway, what a learning opportunity for a pastor when you have that kind of thing happen in your own home.
Well, there's potential here for a major problem in the, you know, that could potentially destroy a church depending on how big of a church it is. You know, just whether they stay, the associate and his wife stayed or went, it was gonna be a big problem. There was gonna be a lot of disagreement, and so, you know, doesn't seem like there was any situation where everybody would win in this. You know, it seems like, I mean, it doesn't seem like the pastor has much of a choice that if the associate is taking a church and, then his wife is just, I guess, going to have to go with him, unless there's some other issue there among, with them. But, it doesn't seem like he would be able to keep her on as a counselor when she's threatening to disclose confidential stuff to the parents of one of the youth. That doesn't seem like it's gonna, in the long term, be a good person to have on your staff, or in that kind of position. So yeah, obviously the violation of confidentiality that is unprofessional, and then trying to manipulate her, manipulate this youth to take her side, and here an adult trying to get a youth to side with them, someone that they're supposed to look up to. You could say that's also immoral. And then, of course, the associate, Morris, having questionable integrity, and not being honest with the board, which it seems to be an attempt to get sympathy, from the board, to kind of get them to feel for him, and maybe, and also kind of turn them against the pastor, hey, sweetie. So the real challenge in this situation is how to call the Browns to moral and professional integrity. There are people being hurt in this situation through the lack of a commitment to integrity and confidentiality. And I know of, there's situations where, where people are reading into things, and they assume something about a situation, and the pastor could possibly straighten it out, but in order to do so, he would have to share some things that are confidential. And, and so the pastor is going to have to take some heat, be willing to take some heat, to keep the confidentiality. And it's like, whether people understand it or not, or upset about it or not, I know growing up when my dad was, he pastored in Nashville, and I was in the youth group. And then I had graduated. The man that was my youth pastor, he was still there after I went to college. He was, found out to be having an affair with this other woman, and he was confronted, and of course had to step down from his position. And the church paid for him and his wife to try to get counseling to try to save their marriage and all this kind of stuff. But there were people who thought, well, even if he's not the youth pastor, he should still be able to come to the church and attend the church. And but because he had been in this position of authority, and then now in this other, having to step down, it seemed like he was even trying to get some sympathy from other people in the church. And my dad had to make the decision to ask them, you're just not going to be able to keep coming to church here. You and your wife are going to need to find another church. And and that people didn't like that. People didn't like him making that call. But, you know, it probably was the right thing to do. And, you know, and I remember other situations where he had to ask somebody, somebody had another former pastor who had some moral failings. He wanted to come to our church, but some of his, you know, the people in our church had some history with him and weren't comfortable with him coming to the church, and he had to encourage them, you know, to go somewhere else. So, but he couldn't explain all those things and why. You know, he just asked people to trust him, that he was doing what he thought was the best decision. All right, well, moving on here, looking more at integrity, we see that the Christian life, and particularly the pastoral ministry, depends upon a vigorous reflection of integrity. The ability to live the life of integrity reaches every aspect of the pastoral ministry. For example, the coherence between what is said in the pulpit and around the table at dinner in the parsonage is essential. Integrity reaches to how numbers are reported, to the denomination, and the truthfulness of the illustrations. Integrity dictates that a pastor who preaches does so out of personal toil with the Bible. This means when ideas are used, they are clearly acknowledged. And integrity demands that bills be paid and the truth be told. A life of integrity is not easy because it requires sacrifice, but such a life is richer and better. The purpose of this lesson is to examine the issue in more detail. So looking at how we define integrity, let me ask you, how do you define integrity? How would you explain integrity? Robert, you got it?
Doing the right thing whether anyone's looking or not.
Okay.
To me, it's that simple.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyone else? Anyone have a different
I was
answer to
actually going to say the very same thing, and it was like an older man who told his son that, and his son was telling us this is what integrity is, you know.
Right.
But it's that, because we're going to be the same all the time, and it's all, you know, it's going to line up with what's right, and you're true to what you say. What you do is what you preach or teach. You know, it's going to be in alignment, coherent.
Mm-hmm. No. Well, as you see here in resource 17.1, the simple definition for integrity is wholeness. The entire movement of scripture in the Christian tradition is to argue for the importance of integrity. And Psalm 7:8 says, "The Lord judges the people. Judge me, O Lord, according to my rightness and according to my integrity that is in me." The Psalm of David asks for God's intervention in the midst of a crisis on the basis of integrity. Here, the integrity is to be located in David. And then Psalm 51 comes from another chapter in the life of David. This is a time when David had failed miserably by his involvement with Bathsheba and his complicity in the death of her husband. This psalm affirms the need for restoration. David gives a clue to the meaning of integrity by referring to a broken spirit and a contrite heart. And then 1 Kings 9:4-5 reflects on the meaning of integrity in the following way. It says, "As for you, if you will walk before me as David your father walked, with integrity of heart and uprightness, doing according to all that I've commanded you, and keeping my statutes and my ordinances, then I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever, as I promised your father David, saying, there shall not fail you a successor on the throne of Israel." And it should be noted that even though David failed God with Bathsheba, he is called a person of integrity. And therefore, integrity does not include perfection, but it does require honesty. When David fails, he admits it and pleads with God for mercy. Talk about integrity cannot be allowed to become a legalism. Job 2:9-10 says, Then his wife said to him, Do you still persist in your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, You speak as any foolish woman would speak. Shall we receive the good at the hand of God and not receive the bad? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. From this, we learn that integrity cannot be merely a reflection of circumstances. Integrity means to be real, authentic, and whole. A person of integrity is capable of being the same, whether in the presence of others or alone. And so it's the idea that the outside and the inside are the same. They're not opposite of each other. So Plato's Republic includes a story titled The Ring of Gyges. The story is intended to argue against what Socrates and Plato suggest is the true nature of justice. The story is about a man who finds a ring that, if turned around, makes a person invisible. The point of the story is that when the just man is invisible, he behaves exactly like the unjust man. Therefore, justice is only done in order to appear just, and not because a person is just. There's no such thing as justice, only that which gets us what we want. The Ring of Gyges argues that being real, authentic, or whole is nothing but an act, and as such, there is no such thing as integrity. Yet Socrates and Plato, you see in your notes there, argue that justice is about a rightly ordered soul, one where the reason rules both spirit and desire. Therefore, it is possible to live with justice and integrity. The Christian faith argues along a similar path as that of Plato and Socrates. The difference is that integrity begins in faith, not in reason. Let's look at integrity, the problem, resource 17.2. All talk about integrity must confront the human tendency to locate too much worth in appearance. The senses are very powerful mechanisms in human life. Aristotle locates 3 levels of life: enjoyment, statesman, and wisdom. So children most naturally prefer ice cream over vegetable soup, but too much ice cream makes life less enjoyable. I've seen that with my own kids, or even my oldest daughter as an adult, who overindulged in ice cream and got and fainted from it in a store. Just had a real strong reaction. She might be somewhat lactose intolerant and all that. But I think it's even happened a couple times with her. So when Aristotle defines action as the desire for happiness, he means at the basic level, we want to do that which contributes to happiness. Human beings act in order to be happy. The most basic level of happiness is enjoyment. Therefore, our first actions are determined by what makes us happy. Yet a life of mere experience or mere enjoyment is a limited life because nothing lasts very long. Such a life can be frustrating. Plato's Republic reflects on freedom in a democracy as that which is determined by desire. Such a society eats to the point of gluttony only to diet. One day is fine beverages and the next it is water. So it's extreme indulgence or extreme lack. Desire and enjoyment are not finally capable of guiding life. That leads to the next area, the life of the statesman widens one's perspective to others, but even here, life cannot be complete. Integrity comes with wisdom because such a life is capable of finding the eternal in the midst of the particular. The basic problem with integrity is that Much of life is concerned with appearances. When life is lived this way, the search for meaning is reduced to grasping at shadows. Human life most naturally reaches for what the senses reveal. This kind of life can be dangerous because what we see, feel, taste, hear, and smell may not be what is important. This fundamental problem is quite apparent in modern philosophy. Descartes, the father of modern philosophy, separates the body from the mind. Thus, he sees them as connecting only on occasion. The problem is that he places the essence of humankind in thought. While this does not have to result in viewing what the body does as unimportant, it often does. To me, it sounds very like Gnosticism that they encountered in the New Testament. Morality is about linking thought with action and embodiment. The mind has a great possibility of convincing the body it is fine to proceed. Modern, it's like I once heard Josh McDowell said, the body doesn't know whether you're married or not. The mind knows if something is wrong or not. The body doesn't know. It just goes along, with whatever the mind tells it to do. But modern philosophy presents a powerful case to human beings for saying something like, at least I intended to do the right thing. Intention can become the pathway to a life that lacks integrity. When will and action are separated too far, then it can become highly problematic. So some people will say, instead of saying I'm sorry or apologizing, we'll just say, well, I didn't intend to do that. I didn't intend to upset you or offend you or hurt you, or and somehow that takes them off the hook, from having to apologize. Is that and it's like people saying, well, that's not the real me. Yes, I did say those things, and yes, I did act in that way, but that's not who I am. As you can somehow separate the two, who you are from your actions. So David Hume, an 18th century philosopher, thought of virtues as artificial. For him, this meant virtues were proposed for mostly selfish reasons. Thomas Hobbes would mostly agree with this, yet if virtues are only animated by human intentionality, they can change when moods, cultures, and conditions change. Such a circumstance diminishes the importance of talk about integrity. Jean-Paul Sartre, a 20th century philosopher who consistently pointed to the dark side of life, often pointed to the lack of integrity in everyday life. One of the terms he used to express this was bad faith. Sartre understood bad faith to be our tendency to lie or allowed ourselves to be lied to while we try to convince ourselves. So a person with an ugly sweater, knowing it is ugly, attempts to convince himself or herself it is pretty by asking you whether it is ugly or pretty. When you say it is pretty, even though the person knows it is ugly, he or she continues to wear it. This is bad faith and is the exact opposite of integrity. Martin Heidegger, another 20th century philosopher, diagnoses the fundamental problem of modernity as the loss of being among the things of life. For Heidegger, authenticity emerges when we understand that the stakes of life, that is, being towards death. A life of integrity is one that faces its own death. Translating this into a Christian understanding, the only way to live an authentic life is to see everything in light of its end, which is eternity. Another dimension of the problem with integrity relates to perfectionism. The Wesleyan holiness trajectory often runs scared at the accusation of works righteousness. It appears that any emphasis upon integrity can either be reduced to intentions or become perfectionism. Both courses are problematic. The linking of the inner and the outer, already discussed in a previous lesson, goes to the heart of what integrity means. Jesus directly addresses this issue by saying, beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them. For then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. Matthew 6:1. Jesus goes on to illustrate what this means. Hypocrites have no integrity because they do not really fool themselves, and they rarely fool those around them. Perfectionism leads to either extreme frustration in life or false claims about oneself. Then we look at integrity and scripture. The Bible speaks clearly to the importance of integrity in the ministry. Paul writes to the troubled church at Corinth concerning his ministry. He says, in the same way, the Lord commanded that those who proclaim the gospel should get their living by the gospel. 1 Corinthians 9:14. He goes on in the next verse and makes it clear that he bases his judgment on non-selfish criteria, for he does not claim this right for himself. He did not expect to be paid and supported financially by the gospel, and he supported himself. In verse 16, Paul writes, if I proclaim the gospel, this gives me no ground for boasting, for an obligation is laid on me, and woe to me if I do not proclaim the gospel. In other words, Paul preaches out of a sense of integrity. He can do nothing else. He does not preach to be paid, even though he deserves to be paid. Paul preaches out of a sense of duty to the gospel entrusted to him. Looking on here, Paul gets very specific in his letters to Timothy regarding the importance of integrity. Here, Paul talks about the qualification for being a bishop or a deacon. Can someone read out the qualifications of being a bishop? Read that list for us.
Above reproach.
Yeah.
Married only once. Temperate, sensible, respectable, hospitable, apt teacher, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money, must manage household well, must keep children submissive, not a recent convert, must be well thought of by outsiders. Such a life to those who desire to preach must aspire.
Does anyone, can anyone think of a situation where this became a problem for somebody in your experience in church, or just, think of maybe some of these, situations out in the public or out in the world, where maybe this wasn't true with somebody that found out, became in a high position.
I hate to say this, I'm both in church and in business, I have known leaders who were quarrelsome and actually looked for opportunities to quarrel.
Mm-hmm.
I just that kind of jumped out at me because of my experience with some folks in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, I've also known some pastors who, I wouldn't say they loved money, but they were very concerned about it,
Mm-hmm.
both personally and for the church.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how you can always, make children submissive. I think there's plenty of pastors or leaders who have, children that rebelled. I would say back then, there were an adult would have a lot more probably control over a child back then than sometimes you can have today. But there's plenty examples in the greater world, in church world, of people that were not above reproach and weren't temperate, and broke their vows, broke their different things. I think of Jimmy Swaggart and Haggard, the guy that he pastored in Colorado Springs, and some things came out about him, and he had to step down from his church. But some of these will not submit to accountability. They won't submit to authority, and they will not let go of their position, and they have a way to go independent, decide that they're going to have just break away from whatever group they were a part of. But for me, one of the good things about the Church of the Nazarene is that all properties are owned by the denomination, and if someone if their church is taken away from them, they can't control that. Their credentials are taken and things like that. So there is that kind of accountability that I think is good. Because we all need somebody, we all need to be accountable to somebody. And and as a pastor, you have your district superintendent, but you also have your church board. And that was something I had for a few years. I had the experience of having to report, give a weekly report to a board. And not everyone, there's some churches where if the pastor is appointed and they don't really have a board, they don't really have that experience. But both churches I were pastored had boards that I had to report to. And it helps to motivate you, to try to make sure you have something good to report, to give an account for. All right, could somebody, Connie, could you read the list of characteristics for a deacon?
I can. Qualifications for being a deacon: must be serious, not double-tongued, not indulging in much wine, not greedy for money, hold fast to the mystery of faith with a clear conscience, let them be tested, married only once, manage children and household well.
Yeah, that the whole thing there about not moving into a position like this too early is very important. Too many times a new believer has been put in a position of leadership and authority, and things don't go well, and they get burned by it and hurt by it. We need to gradually let people move into those positions, where they don't have too much authority all at once. And, you know, there's been young men that were elevated quickly who are no longer, you know, pastors today because it was too much too quickly. And they weren't tested, you know, by life and experience. So the meaning of integrity becomes very important in the case of the bishop and deacon. At least part of the reason for this connects to what they represent. The pattern of integrity expected of a person in ministry follows very closely the pattern of ministry. A person in ministry is to do what is good, hold fast to the mystery of faith, be temperate, serious, etc., and to avoid doing harm, not violent, not a lover of money, not double-tongued. And so some of what this means relates to the difference between ministry as a profession and ministry as a vocation. While ministry is a profession with rules and responsibilities to go along with it, the meaning goes much deeper to a vocation. A profession claims status, but a vocation seeks to answer a call responsibly. A profession is about a career, and vocation concerns ministry. So you know, some want to see it just as a job like any other job, and to a point that is true, but there is an eternal quality to the work that is being done, and and it has a significance in the kingdom. But a person who follows God in any job or work is fulfilling a vocation. All Christians have a primary responsibility to praise God in all they do. Therefore, a school bus driver can be fulfilling a vocation as he or she drives. Although the primary reference is to pastoral ministry as a vocation, is not the only way to understand ministry. Then we have integrity and morality, resource 17.4. So here we have deontological moral theories. We've referred to these before, but they emphasize duty or goodwill, and as such, integrity means living without being conditioned by circumstances. The moral arising from this theory offers reason as a way to live a coherent life. The categorical imperative is about universalizing action. This process is about the kind of integrity that makes it possible to live a moral life. Whereas teleological moral theories are interested in the end toward which action reaches. It requires that life become actively engaged. Aristotle talks about good habits as virtues. These virtues form the basis for a character capable of integrity. In fact, character is the definition of integrity. And then morality is about formation of character. The moral agent or person makes choices, but most importantly, the moral agent brings character. The thread that binds the history, personality, education, and practice of character is integrity, at least in the virtuous person. When integrity characterizes the life of the pastor, it means his or her life is whole. This brings us to integrity and holiness theology, resource 17.5. Theologically speaking, integrity is spelled holiness. The teaching of the Wesleyan holiness tradition holds up the whole life or the life of integrity as a possibility by the cooperant grace of God. That's the grace that we cooperate with. while moral reflection tends to make character an achievement of reason, the holiness tradition understands that apart from God, no integrity would be possible. The manifestation of integrity in the life of holiness is conviction. Persistence is the major component of a life defined by conviction. It's like Eugene Peterson said that the Christian life is a long obedience in the same direction. So it's that, you know, so that integrity comes from persistence and conviction. So that there may be a good deal that comes and goes, but a life of integrity manifests itself with the kind of tenacity that will not cave in to the demands of the situation. You know, I might have mentioned this before, I know people had held certain convictions when it came to the issue of homosexuality and same-sex marriage and all that, until their children came out as gay, you know, and they, you know, they said they, you know, they had to find a way of changing things so they could accept their child, you know, and fully embrace their child. They didn't feel like they could if they couldn't accept that, you know, their homosexuality was acceptable, you know, to God. You know, they had to, and so and the ones that I know that have done this, they're, you know, most of their conviction, their change of thinking is mostly based on the fact that they know people that are gay. They ask, you know, they listened to them and came to the conviction that, you know, you know, that what they're doing is no different than than a heterosexual, you know, that it's something that they can't help. And so we, you know, so therefore scripture must, you know, it must be wrong. It must not be talking about the same thing, you know. So it's you know, so they caved in to the demands of that situation, you know, and it, you know, it does test you, but you know, that doesn't mean you don't still love your child if you don't agree with what they're doing, you know, what decision they're making, how they're living their life. So convictions will not be given up easily, and when they are, a different kind of person emerges. And it's like was said earlier, integrity is who we are when no one is looking. So therefore, by coming to understand one's convictions, it is possible to begin the process of self-understanding. Convictions fall into three general categories: moral, doctrinal, and philosophical. Moral convictions concern how life is lived. Doctrinal convictions reflect one's theological understanding, and philosophical convictions define worldview. Convictions operate at three levels: cognitive, affective, and volitional. That's like mentally, emotionally, and the will. Mind, you know, mind, will, and emotions, or mind, emotions, and will. Understanding the connection between holiness, theology, and convictions will make more evident what guides our love and identifies us as moral agents. Holiness as a moral conviction allows freedom in the face of pluralism. This makes me think of a book by Josh McDowell called Beyond Belief. to conviction. And the premise is that youth need to know why we believe what we believe. You know, it's not just enough to say the Bible says so or the parents say so, but why? Why is it that we believe what we believe? And that's when it becomes for them a conviction. You know, because if they can process through the why and it goes from, they can understand it and then apply it, then they're gonna live it, and it's not gonna be just because someone says something different, they're gonna, you know, go with that. You know, if they know what they believe, not only know what, but why they believe it, it's more likely they'll hold to it. So we have these moral, doctrinal, and philosophical convictions. Carlos, would you read the list of moral convictions? Resource 17.6.
All right. Moral convictions. The moral life arises out of the gospel. The moral life is sustained in a community of non-coercive discourse. There ought to be, sorry, I'm getting it.
It's okay.
I don't know what thing. No, I don't know what's going on. Who knows? Who knows?
Okay.
There ought to be a qualitative difference in the Christian life. Life is foundationally. Oh my gosh, life is foundationally sacred. It is important to define levels of conventional responsibility, understanding the meanings of stewardship, and living in light of that reality is foundational to living out the Christian life, and moral convictions engender human freedom.
Okay. Any of those you find confusing or hard to understand that we can discuss? All of those make sense. I think I like that one. The moral life is sustained in a community of non-coercive discourse. You know, there has to be a freedom of discourse. There has to be a freedom, you know, to ask questions, to raise doubts. You know, people need to be able to bring their doubts to God and allowed to express them. You know, not if it, you know, not in a way that's to try to persuade others to doubt as well. But you know, that the Christian way, I don't think is anything about coercing someone. You know, it's about lovingly persuading through argument, you know, good, clear argument and love. All right. Robert, you have a thought?
Yeah, you know, I've had many conversations around this single topic. The art of discourse is lost on our society today.
Mhm.
The ability to sit down and just have a conversation with disagreements and talk through those is lost on people today. And you, unfortunately, I know this for myself, and I pray I'm not the only one who experiences this. You often find yourself, because of the affront of people, defending, you know, in this mode of defense, and what happens is then the opportunity gets lost to expand on the disagreement and understand one another's position. I run into this every day. You know, this is my position. I don't like it, too bad. instead of trying to discuss, well, how did you arrive at that? So anyway, the opportunity to have a discussion where we disagree on minor things, right? Because oftentimes it's minor things that we're in disagreement on, and understanding why we disagree, it's lost on society at large. So I find for myself oftentimes saying, okay.
Mhm.
And and letting it fall, when in my heart I really want to explore, because there's learning and exploration. When someone gets to share how they came to a decision, but folks aren't comfortable doing that. They'd rather just defend their position without exploring why they have the position. So you don't really get to learn anything when it's that, this is what I believe.
Mhm. Yeah.
Anyway, I think that that's just such a lost part of conversation and communication today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just want to give you the sound bites, because that's all we hear, from the public sector, right? Whether it's politicians or, whatever it is, whatever the authority figure is, it's their sound bites. And so the opportunity to explore those and, discuss those, argue your points in a friendly manner, it's a lost art. It's just really hard to do that today.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else experiences that or not, but that's my experience.
Mhm. Well, we nobody, I mean, there's a lot of people talking, but not a lot of listening. There's a lot of yelling and reacting and so forth, but not, and some of it is like reacting to a straw man, because we're assuming that this is true instead of actually, finding out for sure. Is this what you really think? Is this what you really believe? Especially those that look different, that act different, that think different. Before we talk, before we can talk intelligently to someone, we need to listen to them, and not just speak to them out of our ignorance. Because there's a lot of people, I can't say I know what their experience is like. I can't say I know what the experience of what women experience is, or I don't know the experience of Hispanic people or Black people, or I don't know what it's like fully to deal with racism, because I don't feel like I don't know that I've really encountered what they might call reverse racism, but I know I can have proclivities, and I can not recognize some of the privilege that I have, being white and being male or whatever. It's easy to want to dismiss what the experience of others, because it makes me feel uncomfortable, or I might have to own up to some bias or something that I have, but that's how we learn. We learn when we're uncomfortable, and it forces us to take a hard look at ourselves. All right, let's go on to the next one. Let's see. Connie, can you read that doctrinal convictions list?
Yes.
Thank you.
God continually and graciously seeks to make himself known, Father, Son, and the Spirit, as he enjoys his creation and is enjoyed by his creation. Humankind, while existing in a condition of co-determination, is finally defined by grace-empowered freedom. Human character is formed in worship. Jesus the Christ has entered history without privilege and has subverted the power of evil. The Spirit calls the community of faith into being through the preaching of the Scripture. The church exists to be the community of incarnation and a community of non-coercive discourse, which provides a structure of grace. The gracious offer of a transformed life, both as gift and grace-empowered response. The presence of the rule of God is both reality and promise.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions about any of those, or disagreement, or anything that you've not thought of before, you think, stands out to you?
Would you, maybe I'm just tired, expand on co-determination. I don't know that I've ever seen it
Oh, okay.
in this frame.
I think it's kind of saying that, I think it's similar to that cooperant grace, or the idea of partnering with God.
Okay.
That, we and God together determine the course of our lives, maybe.
That makes sense. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense, because God determined for us to be in a relationship with him to begin with, right? And now we need to choose to be in that relationship, right? So that would, does that make sense?
Yeah,
by getting in the way that I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, we accept that, we accept his grace, and that's what empowers us.
Right. Okay.
To be free. To determine the course that he set for us. So it's like, it's not like God's just not like controlling us and controlling everything. It's only as we work with God that direction is determined. So yeah, I think that's what it means.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on these? Let's see. All right, so let me quickly go over mention these philosophical convictions. First, all things are related, relational. That's relational ontology. The community with which we identify shapes us. We exist as a prayer in the presence of God. Most of life is in between. And so these convictions only represent the process where integrity of action, belief, and thought emerge. The point is that integrity requires the hard work of understanding the convictions that shape and guide life. Let's see. And then who can read practical convictions? You do that, Connie? Can y'all hear me?
Oh.
Oh, sorry.
Did you ask? I didn't hear. I was rattling paper. I was trying to.
Oh,
open
okay.
that.
Yeah. Can you read
Did you
the?
want me to read the bottom, the practical
Yeah.
convictions?
Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry. I will always endeavor to be honest in my communication. I will honor my family as a matter of first importance. I will consider the way in which I use money as a way of testifying to my faith. I will never allow myself to be in a situation of sexual temptation. I will endeavor to grow in understanding by reading and formal education. I will never handle money as a pastor in my church. Those are
Now
really practical,
Yeah.
really practical to keep the whole integrity intact.
Yeah. Yeah. And that last one could be a challenge depending on how big your church is.
I actually told a pastor that I would take up the offering for him when I saw him doing it. And I communicated that to one of the gentlemen in the church. I said he shouldn't be picking up the offering. He said, "Oh, it's good for him. It's humbling." I'm like, okay, you're missing the point. So when he said that to me, again, it was one of the, well, we were at church and I didn't have time to discuss that further with him at the moment, but it's an integrity thing. If the pastor doesn't collect the offering, then no one can make the accusation that he's done something that he shouldn't have. So it takes away, those possible conversations or innuendos. So while it may be perceived as a humbling experience for a pastor to pick up the offering, it also opens the door for other opportunities for things that would be untrue, right? Well, if you don't put yourself in that position, then you don't have to defend it, right? So I'm dead on line with that right there.
Yeah. All right. Moving on to pastoral confidentiality. Let's see. Can you read that, Robert?
Sir, the manual of the Church of Nazarene states, "It shall be the duty of every minister of the Church of the Nazarene to hold in trust and confidence any communication of a confidential nature given to him or her by a counselee of the congregation while he or she is acting in his or her professional character as a licensed or ordained minister of the Church of the Nazarene. The public dissemination of such communication without the express written consent of the declarant is expressly condemned. Any Nazarene minister who violates the above regulations subjects himself or herself to disciplinary sanctions." You want to keep reading?
No, hold on. No, that's good.
Yeah.
So it's important that confidentiality is described as a duty. Often missed is the further qualification that this communication must be of a confidential nature. This means not all communication with the minister is necessarily confidential. So, for example, many things a pastor will hear are not priestly in nature, but administrative. Another point of this policy is that a minister must not discuss the information in a public setting. If a minister does this, he or she has compromised the priestly office. Confidentiality is essential to the pastoral ministry as a priestly function of the church. Any thoughts on this? Questions or anything?
I really think the safeguard for me, let me say it this way. The safeguard for me is that if I'm having a conversation with someone, regardless of the matter, that's a conversation between us.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? I mean, And I blame the Navy for this, because I worked in a very sensitive group when I was in the Navy. So, I mean, it was so sensitive that I couldn't talk about what went on in one room when I went into another room. And I couldn't carry it out the door with me. So when I left the building, everything that took place in that building had to stay there, literally. So, and I went into that at 19 years of age, and that has stuck with me all my life. So if I'm having a conversation with any one of you three, and it doesn't matter what the topic is, you know, it's a conversation that we have, and I'm very likely to forget that unless you've asked me to pray for something. But for me, I'm likely to not remember it unless you bring it up. Does that make sense? And so for me, it's the next step, administratively or otherwise. It's a conversation between individuals, is between those individuals. Now, if it's something, if you're sharing something with me and you want to go share it with somebody else, that, you know, that's your business. Does that make sense? That's just how I'm wired. And God's given me the ability to do that, to safeguard those conversations. If we're in a group and we're having a conversation, that's a different matter. That's public. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I agree with that wholeheartedly, is I guess what I'm trying to say, bottom line. Conversation between individuals is a conversation between individuals.
Yeah. And it seems like the other temptation to avoid here is not using anything in an illustration. You know, even if you're not naming names or anything like that, you know, someone might be able to figure out who you're talking about. So, you know, something to be careful about. Let's see, Connie, can you read that next part, which originated in 12:15?
Sure. Let the priest be discreet and cautious, so that he may pour wine and oil into the wounds of the injured person like a skilled physician, diligently inquiring into the circumstances both of the sinner and of the sin, so that he may wisely understand what advice he should give and what remedy he should apply, trying different tests to heal the patient. Let him guard with greatest care against exposing the sinner even slightly by word or sign or in any other way. But if he should need wiser advice, let him ask it cautiously, without any mention of the person. For if anyone dares reveal a sin uncovered to him in the place of confession, we decree that he not only be disposed from the office of priest, but also be dispatched to a monastery of strict discipline to sow penance for the rest of his life.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
12, that was 12:15.
Well, this whole concept of the priestly office,
Mm-hmm.
there is so much harm done,
Oh yeah.
not just to the person, but to the whole church, when a confidentiality has been breached. And who else is going to be honest and transparent and vulnerable with the pastor or minister, whoever's in that position, if you then let other people know about it?
Yeah.
It's just, anyway, there's just so much harm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it, you know, it's that's been challenged. I know that the confidentiality has been challenged in legal matters of, you know, things that were confessed to a priest, and the priest not willing to violate that, the sanctity of that, and will face prosecution and so forth for not opening up in a court. So the purpose of confidentiality is for the priest to be in a position to render service to the hurts, spiritual and emotional, of the church. The integrity to hold in confidence information shared in a counseling setting speaks to the character of the minister. Other helping professions require confidentiality, but the context of pastoral confidentiality arises in the delicate issues related to the priestly work of the minister. Pastoral care would have little meaning apart from the trust guaranteed by the integrity of the pastor. From a deontological point of view, confidentiality becomes an unconditional duty. Teleological consideration teaches that the consequence of pastoral confidentiality is dependent upon character, and its consequence is character. Either way, the importance of confidentiality is essential to the practice of ministry. So let's look at practical and ethical problems of confidentiality, resource 17.8. First, it can be ambiguously ethically. For example, what should be held in confidence? If a person tells you something that, if kept in confidence, will injure another person or even the person talking, then confidence must be questioned. Sometimes confidence is extended too far for it to be useful. The abuse of a child would be an example of this. If it is an administrative concern, confidence does not apply. Second, sometimes confidence only pretends to protect the counselee when in fact it protects the counselor. When keeping the information does not affect the counselee and only protects the counselor legally, then its moral standing is questionable. Anytime that confidence is mostly about the counselor, its moral status should be questioned. Third, too often confidentiality lacks accountability. It can be a veil for the pastor who cannot seek consultation and therefore cannot render the service needed. Confidence can be a place for the counselor to hide from himself or herself. Fourth, confidentiality tends to expand beyond appropriate borders, perhaps to the point where any positive result is impossible. Fifth, confidentiality can hide the real issue, which can be about power. If a person knows your secrets, he or she may exert some power over you. This can lead to a temptation to exert that power in dangerous ways. The moral issues at stake radiate around the appropriateness of privacy for the counselor and the counselee. Integrity solves the problems. The character of the pastor is the one thing that is always brought to the circumstance. All of the issue can be dealt with, and integrity characterizes the work of the pastor. So, moving on to integrity of confidentiality. Carlos, can you read that, resource 17.9?
If confidentiality is to have true integrity, the following should characterize it. Confidentiality should be explicitly requested and granted. Before one grants a confidence, it should cause one to ponder why such intimacy is required and what purpose confidence will serve in this context. One should consider very carefully the long-term effect of a confidence and determine whose need it serves. One should consider the way the offer of confidence changes the relationship. One should limit the range of the offer of confidence with increasing discipline.
This, and I think this is where the issue of dealing with someone of the opposite sex, it has to be, very careful. And one that doesn't put the counselor in a tempting position or tempting, for the counselee. In it, so there's some things that a woman should only can reveal to another woman that she trusts as a counselor, and that men should only share to another man as a counselor.
Can I ask a stupid question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So this is I know you've served as a pastor. I know Robert has. I don't know, Carlos, if you've been put in this position or not. What do men, lead pastors, do when a woman wants to have a counseling session? It's confidential. Do you have it with her? Do you bring in another woman, another man? I mean, how do you handle that? I mean, I know some smaller churches it would be difficult, but
Yeah.
I mean, so how do you practically handle it?
Well, I think it's most pastors are not licensed counselors, and so there will be some limitations of how much counseling you should commit to, and I think there will be a situation where it would be good to have an associate with you, or a spouse, or even have somebody nearby in the next room that knows you're meeting with someone, that is cannot maybe not hear what's being said, but knows that someone's in there, so that there's no situation where you've been alone with someone and no one knew you were alone with them, kind of thing. But or you can meet with them in not just in an office, but like in the sanctuary, or in a foyer or something like that, that maybe not everyone hears what's being said, but that there's some public knowledge of that, or or just there may be some things where it's just like, well, I can't counsel you, but here's someone I recommend you go to. And I mean, I know counselors will have different policies about if they will counsel women, or just counsel men only, or women that counsel women only, things like that. So I think just acknowledging your limitations, and that I can give a little advice, and I can pray for you and encourage you, but I recommend that you go to a professional counselor.
One thing that, and maybe you can address this too, there seems to be a little bit of a double standard, that if a female was the senior pastor, that it's like she can't give even have like a conversation with a man, things that a man may bring up that needs to be discussed with another man.
Mm-hmm.
And so then there's this dilemma where you don't even meet like what you just described, to make sure it's in a safe environment. Everybody knows. It wouldn't even be proper you to probably even listen. Well, then can a female really be a senior pastor? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That how do you overcome? I don't feel called to be a senior pastor. I'm not asking this for myself, but how do women get over that unless they have a spouse that is, maybe they're not ordained, but they're really gifted in that they help share that load? Robert, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Chris said, and I also think that regardless of gender, but when it's someone of the opposite sex, when they approach you and they want to have a conversation, my immediate question is concerning. You know, you can be general, you know what I mean, but you have to get a little idea of what they want to talk about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because if it's a, you know, everyone considers personal things a little differently. You know, I mean, there are personal things that are pretty shallow and there are personal things that are very deep, right? So because I'm not a licensed counselor, the first thing I want to know is, what are we talking about? You know, because if it's something that they need counseling for, then that's my opportunity to say, you really need to see a counselor.
Yeah.
And here, let me hook you up with somebody. Let me, you know, but so before you agree to meet with someone of the opposite sex, you've got to know what they're wanting to talk about. They don't have to give you the details, but you need to know what they want to talk about, because
have some
that's your first
filter.
guardrail. Yeah,
Okay.
and that's the first guardrail. So even I think for a female lead pastor, right? She has the same duty to herself and to her congregate. You know, if I go up to my lead pastor, you know, Pastor Connie, I really need to talk to you. Your first response really ought to be, okay, about what? What do you need to talk about? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because if we don't have a construct for what the conversation is going to be,
Yeah, and
then
then
we
you'd
don't-
know,
Yeah,
who to have nearby or with you, or
Yes.
whatever that is. Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
Good counsel.
it's the first response. What do we want to talk about? You know, because it's critical. Because if it's something that is very personal and, you know, not legal, right? Not, you know, they're not having psychological issues, or maybe they're having a relationship issue with their spouse, right? Well, my wife's going to be front and center, you know, and so I'm going to say, Connie, my wife's going to be a part of that conversation. Are you okay with that? You know what I mean? And if you're not okay with that, then that ends that conversation. You see what I'm saying? So I think there's an initial response from us that's a question. What are we talking about? You know, you're having a problem with the worship pastor, okay. You know what I'm saying? But you still, all the other guardrails that Chris mentioned have to be in place, but it starts with, what are we talking about?
Yeah,
You
that's
know?
good.
Yeah.
That's good.
To me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I was an intern at a church where the pastor said that, you know, he always had his door open when he was meeting with different of the female staff, you know, that his executive assistant was right there in the next room. And, you know, and he wasn't meeting to counsel them. He was just meeting because he had to meet with them as staff, you know. But, you know, I think he wouldn't have trouble if there was 2 or 3 of them together and he was meeting with them, kind of thing, you know. But the main thing is not being alone with a woman who's not your spouse, you know. So I think that, you know, that goes both ways, you know, whether you're a male or female pastor, you know. My mother's been a pastor for 20 years, and she's talked to, you know, men all the time. You know, she's confronted men in her church. She's challenged the men. She's prayed for them, and you know, different times they've confessed to things, you know, that and she's challenged them to repent, you know. And you know, but you know, there's time, I know there's, you know, she'll, if she meets with any of them, that, you know, her associate pastor is going to be there with her or nearby or something like that, you know. But you know, she's not going to go meet him for lunch or meet him alone somewhere. So but it's, you know, there are, and there, you know, we do have women that are pastoring these, you know, good sized churches in the Church of the Nazarene that would be great to, you know, ask them questions like that. You know, if God ever told you, I want you to be a senior pastor, that there are many good sources to get
Yeah.
advice from.
Even as I do pulpit supply, I mean, Terry and I both get really close to all the people, you know, that are there in these little small churches. And I've had opportunities to have regular calls with the women and pray with them. But
Yeah.
if any of the men had done that, I would have been like, what am I supposed to do? You know, I mean, you know, if they had wanted that type of to be a part of a prayer group, I mean, I would have made sure it was more than just them. I could do that
Right.
just one-on-one with the women, which was wonderful.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll just see what the Lord has. And but this is really good about how you put really safe guardrails up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, if you're a pastor, you know, like our pastor will pray over men and women. And so whether you're a man or woman, you can lay a hand on a man and pray for him, you know, on their shoulder or head or something. You have that, you know, I believe you have that authority.
Right.
And, you know, that's not, I mean, that's right there in front of everybody, you know, so that's not inappropriate either. And, or you can kneel down there and ask them how you can pray for them, you know. And then determine that, you know, well, here, say, you know, ask another man to come, I need you to come pray with this guy. You know, he's got some issues here that, you know, he needs to share with another man, so to speak, you know. Because there's things that a male pastor shouldn't, you know, have a woman confess to him, you know, that would be things that would be inappropriate, you know, and then that she would need to share some of those things with another woman. So, you know, it's a balancing thing, but I think it's all doable. I don't think it's impossible, you know.
The only other thing I was going to add back to the meeting situation, always scheduled and always with a specific time frame.
Yeah.
You know, we're not going to get into a long drawn out conversation, right? It's, you know,
Right.
this is when I'll meet you, and this is how long we're going to meet for.
Mm-hmm.
And you hold to that. You absolutely hold to that.
Well,
That's another good guardrail.
And on the other side of that, like if you're a man counseling a man or a woman counseling a woman, if you're having to meet with them more than 3 times, you know, that they need to be referred to a professional counselor, you know, because you're, you know, that no, you know, most pastors don't have time to be professional counselors or full, you know, don't have time to counsel someone more than 6 times, you know. They need to, there's more that needs to happen, and they need to take that up with a licensed counselor. So that's a big thing, is you learn how to refer people, you know, what can I handle, and then what do I need to refer? And because they can just, you know, latch on and just drain you and drain you and drain you. And you have to have boundaries, you know, with people. Because I had people that could just come in my office and just want to hang on for hours and hours and hours, and, you know, drove my wife crazy. What, you know, can't you tell them no? Can't you say you got to go? Can't you? but there's some people it's hard to do that with.
Amen. And I don't mean this in the negative way, but it's the truth. There are people in our congregations that will suck us dry.
Yeah.
Take
Yeah.
all of our energy, all of our mental capacity and drain it. And
Mhm.
you just have to learn who they are. And those are the ones that you definitely have to set the guardrails on.
Yeah.
This is all I got. This is all I have for you, and that's a little bit of self-preservation, but the reality is we have a congregation to shepherd.
Right.
Not
Right.
this individual.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Good stuff. Good stuff. Good questions. So the duty of ministerial confidence needs to be placed within the context of the church. In fact, confidence is incomprehensible apart from the constituency it intends to serve. The church is not just a collection of individuals. Rather, the church is a community of persons who are formed by the Holy Spirit into a new reality, a body. While confidence is morally required in many circumstances, it can contribute to problems in other situations. For example, holding a confidence regarding one member of a family may compromise the safety of the entire family. This means counseling with integrity requires that the pastor do more than hold secrets. It requires that the pastor establish a covenant with the counselee in order to offer perspective and direction in Christian integrity. Too often, confidentiality becomes a lazy holding of a secret. Integrity requires the pastor to examine his or her motives and seek the positive good of the counselee, and that is not always to hold the secret. There are too many situations regarding confidentiality for all of them to be worked out here. The point is to understand that a character shaped by the truth will often be in situations where discernment will be required. Integrity is therefore a character trait necessary for those who seek to offer counsel. Okay, so let me close with another scenario involving Paul Tillich. So Paul Tillich was, until his death in 1965, a prominent theologian and a man of many contradictions. He was a vocal critic of Hitler in the days prior to World War II. In fact, Tillich was removed from his tenured position at an important German university largely because of his support of the Jews and his criticism of the Nazi Party. He was then invited by Union Theological Seminary in New York to join the faculty. Tillich would hold this position for 20 years before spending some time at Harvard University and Chicago University. During his lifetime, he became a major voice for the Christian faith. He sought to address the prevailing theological and moral issues of the time. Even now, after his death, Tillich remains an important theological resource. Yet, after his death, Tillich's wife, Hannah, wrote a book that spelled out Paul Tillich's many sexual affairs. Apparently, all the time he was addressing important theological and ethical issues, Tillich was living a life well below the usually accepted norms. Several have stepped up to say that part of this was Hannah's imagination, but no one denies Tillich was unfaithful to his wife. For those who found the inspiration in Tillich's writing, the contradiction of a theological genius and immorality has been painful. One person went so far as to suggest that while Paul Tillich's genius as a theologian and a philosopher were nearly unparalleled in his time, he never matured emotionally beyond an adolescent. Reflecting on the need to join faith with morality into a life of integrity, think about the way in which a person can avoid the contradiction that characterized Tillich. How, and here's a way for you to respond, how does a minister avoid the contradiction?
Accountability partner.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's good. Any other thoughts?
one of the things that comes to mind is to be diligent to practice your own spiritual disciplines. That if we're really in the Word of God and really in prayer for the relationship, not just to study to preach the next sermon or to
Right,
you know, that we're being fed by the Word. We're so much less prone to go totally off the rails or to be thinking something that's not right.
yeah,
But having an accountability partner is crucial, because they'll see, if you're really spending time with them, they'll see
Right.
through any facade and call you on it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, you've you know, I don't know how much you had heard about Paul Tillich, but he was prominent, and you know, of course, he died in the 60s, I guess, 65 or something. So you wouldn't necessarily have known him. And I've read just a little bit, but I in my master's work and theology classes, you know, he's a prominent name that's brought up. But I didn't really know him anything about him personally. I've only known the type of theology and what time frame he was in, but I didn't really know about his adultery. And so that, you know, just because he's prominent doesn't excuse that. In fact, it accentuates the fact that Tillich began at some point to think of himself as an exception to the pedestrian codes by which most people are expected to live. And his moral failures are no more significant than those of the home mission pastor or the new youth pastor. Here's some lessons that emerge from looking at his life. The first is integrity demands moral accountability, and that's one that was shared here. And no one is above the norms of Christian behavior. One must always be careful about intellectualizing the faith. When a person of prominence is found to be a hypocrite, the damage to all others cannot be fully accounted for. One should be careful not to allow the great failures of Tillich to become an excuse for smaller, less evident failures. The fact that Tillich was finally unsuccessful in his attempt to live the faith he reflected upon does not suggest that no insight can be found in his writing. His moral failure merely reminds us that integrity is essential for an enduring contribution. And for many, Paul Tillich is the symbol of a lonely intellectual who found it impossible to avoid the contradictions that finally compromised his moral theory and maybe even his theology. All right, so we've attempted to define the moral significance of integrity, articulate the parameters and importance of confidentiality, understood and taught ethical theories and ethical behavior in the church, discerned and made theological-based ethical decisions in the midst of a complex and or paradoxical context. And we applied Christian ethics to the issue of integrity of the minister and the congregation for authentic Christian faithfulness and public witness. So the homework is to write a 2 to 3 page covenant of integrity for pastoral ministry, read and respond to resource 1710, and make a journal entry reflecting upon the content of this lesson. The closing thought is from Psalm 1, which contrasts two kinds of people. The first kind of person follows the advice of the wicked, takes the path of sinner and scoffers. The second kind of person delights in the law, and because of that does not take the advice of the wicked, or walk the path of the sinner, or sit with the scoffers. The second meditates on the law day and night, while the first kind of person is driven away like chaff. The second kind of person is like a tree planted by streams of water. A person of integrity does not take the easy way out, but in the end, he or she endures. The point of talking about integrity is to affirm the importance of planting one's life in the truth. This never leads to an easy life, but it embodies an enduring life. I need to take just a moment to get some more water, and y'all can chat for a minute while I do that if you want, or take a break yourself. And I'm gonna go off my video for just a second, but feel free to have a conversation while I take a break.
Thank you, brother. That's why I come in here two-fisted. I drink my coffee, then I come with water. Are you working in Missouri right now, Carlos?
No, I'm in Wichita Falls.
Oh, Wichita Falls. Okay. I don't know why I was thinking Missouri earlier. Y'all talk about Wichita Falls. I don't know why my brain went to Missouri. I apologize.
No, you're good. You're good.
It's gonna get
Sit
cold up there
up.
tonight, isn't it?
Yeah, it is gonna be cold tonight. I gotta sit at a laundromat doing security.
No.
Yeah, that's my Thursday job. So usually I would have it off, but Thursdays I go and work part-time there, and
Oh,
from
okay.
midnight to 6 in the morning.
Wow.
So should be fun, interesting tonight.
I was thinking to say, if nothing else, it ought to be interesting.
Yeah.
I can only imagine. I am going to take 2 seconds. I'll be right back.
Yep, you're good.
How many times you get somebody to want you to be their counselor in your day job?
Yeah, quite a bit.
I bet.
Quite a bit. Everybody wants to talk about their problems,
Right.
which I don't mind, and that's actually kind of the cool aspect of my job is I get to, especially when we arrest them or anything like that, we spend hours with them.
Right.
But that's usually when I get to share a little bit and kind of make them feel a little bit better about what's going on, if I can, anyways.
Right. Yeah.
I think I would have to probably say DWIs are probably my moneymaker.
Oh, really?
It's at least a minimum of 4 hours that I'm sitting with these people. So I mean, we talk about everything. As long once they cool down and once they're calm and realize the seriousness of the event. But I would probably have to say, I think there was probably only one that I really didn't get to share faith with, or like try to mentor and like, hey man, it's okay, things are gonna get better, and it's a cool feeling whenever they kind of break down and like, oh, he is human.
Right. Yeah.
So does that mean you're kind of like Dog the Bounty Hunter?
Guy, I have better hair.
Yeah. He'll work hard to take him down, but once he does, he really tries to help him, it seems like.
Yeah. Not every aspect or not every case is that way. Some of them, they just won't allow me to talk, or there's no getting through. But some of them, I would say the majority of them, I get a little bit in there, and they're hearing Jesus either from me or from my radio in my car. So either way, they'll get a little bit.
Yeah. All right. Moving on to lesson 18. This is setting an example for believers in family life. And so what we know is that the family is an essential element in any society. Whether we know them or not, everyone has a biological mother and a biological father. God intends for all people to grow up in a safe and edifying family. Aristotle understood that human beings require associations in order to achieve ends that would otherwise remain close to us. For Aristotle, the fundamental association is the household. He also has refers to the community and the state and also friendship. But he says in the household, he understood that in this basic association, our basic needs are met. Aristotle also understood that the household is required in order for deeper and more complex associations to be possible. So this is the final lesson that specifically reflects upon a moral concern through the lens of Christian ethics. This lesson in some ways will be the place where the previous two lessons are best understood. For example, sexuality is intended to be worked out and taught appropriately in the family. Likewise, one learns about integrity in the home from people who model it. So by the end of this lesson, we should be able to articulate the importance of the family for the moral life, understand the ethical theories and how they teach and nurture ethical behavior in the Christian community, discern and make theologically informed decisions in the midst of a complex and a paradoxical context, understand and apply the unique ethical dimensions of spiritual leadership in the church, practice faithful stewardship of personal relations, including marriage and family. So we have also a new scenario. And in this one, Mark Callum is the children's pastor at Salem Point Church of the Nazarene. His children's group is composed of 85 bubbling faces and voices. Mark has been the children's pastor for 6 months at Salem Point. This is already the best place he and his family have ever been. The possibilities for ministry seem almost limitless with this group. Then one Sunday after church, he feels a tug on the leg of his pants. He turns and sees a little boy named Stephen who is crying. Mark drops to one knee so he can look Stephen in the eyes and ask what is wrong. Through more than a few tears, Mark learns Stephen's mother and father are arguing every day. Just this morning, Stephen heard the word divorce and it scared him. Stephen tells Pastor Mark he often hears his mother crying at night. Stephen says he is very sad most of the time these days. In fact, Stephen, usually a well-behaved child, has become somewhat of a problem at school. Pastor Mark would have to admit that Stephen is a little more trouble to handle in children's church. After a few minutes, Stephen's parents arrive and he leaves with them. Just before he walks out the door, Stephen turns to wave goodbye to Pastor Mark. That afternoon, Pastor Mark calls his senior pastor, Russell James, to tell him about the conversation. He wants to know what to do now. Pastor Russell has been the pastor of this church for 20 years. In fact, he married Stephen's parents and he baptized Stephen after he was born. Stephen's parents are active in the church. Joy, Stephen's mother, is on the church board. Frank, Stephen's father, is a 10th grade Sunday school teacher. Both of his parents sing in the choir. Their attendance at services has been regular, but recently there have been many times when they came and left in different cars. Pastor Russell is reluctant to intervene, but Pastor Mark feels a responsibility to act upon the information shared by Stephen. Pastor Russell is committed to helping the families of his church grow in the faith together. He has always attempted to model Christian leadership in his family and in the church. In fact, the church has an annual family retreat. Finally, Pastor Russell and Pastor Mark decide to pay a visit to Joy and Frank. After a little time of talking together, Pastor Russell speaks directly to the plea of their son, Stephen. First, they try to brush the comments aside, but then admit they have been fighting a good deal. Then Frank says this is a private family matter and should not concern the church. Reflecting on this story, what should be the next step, if there even should be a next step, for the pastoral team at Salem Point Church of the Nazarene? Any thoughts? It's a doozy, isn't it?
It is. I'm glad the children's pastor pressed the issue. They're both in leadership roles in different ways, and they're having issues, and I think there should be some grace extended that as long as they're willing to work through their issues.
Yeah.
Right. So, and they don't clarify what their issues are, except that they're fighting.
Right.
So there's a whole lot of unknowns here for us, but I think they need to have counseling. I think they need to be prayed for. And at this point, until you know more, you just have to pray a lot, and you have to pray with them, and you have to get them to continue to be honest about what's going on, whether it impacts their ability, whether she needs to step down from the board and he needs to stop teaching Sunday school. I think at this point it's to be determined, right? But as long as they're taking steps to resolve the issue, then you continue to pray with them and work with them and allow them to work through it. I mean, that's the grace of God. And if it gets to a point where there is division, then they have to step down from their leadership roles. It's because, again, it's a matter of integrity. But those are my initial thoughts. I mean, without more information, you don't know where the journey is going to take them and where the journey is going to take the pastors. But they're aware of it, they're sensitive to it, and they can speak encouragement and truth into their lives as long as they're working to resolve their differences.
Yeah. Well, what do you think of that statement that Frank says this is a private family matter and should not concern the church? Do you agree or disagree with that?
Like I kind of agree with what Robert said. They're both in leadership positions, and unfortunately, in those leadership positions, your problems affect the church. I've seen it personally on my worship team, that we've had to tell people that, like, hey, the worship ministry, you are a priest, you are a pastor, you are a minister, you're just not up here singing songs for willy-nilly or anything like that, but you are in a leadership position. People see you, people look up to you, people are responding to you, you are ministering to those people. So it affects it, and I'm just in a small church. I'm sure large churches are the same, but people notice those kind of things when there's problems and when there's a little bit of strife here and there. And, if they're showing up in different cars, granted, sometimes me and Stephanie do that. It's just because of schedule wise, but you know, when 99.9% of the time they're riding together, and then all of a sudden now they're riding separately and leaving separately, and you know, people are going to start wondering and speaking and, you know, asking questions. So I think it does has a lot to do. Now, does the church need to know every detail of what's going on? Absolutely not. That's between them and, you know, their
Mhm.
counselor, or, you know, the pastor's like, hey, let's get you guys some help. But I think with the two leadership spots there, it does have a lot to do with the church. And one thing that what kind of got me thinking was how the senior pastor was reluctant to intervene, you know, and I think we see this a lot because with smaller churches, because, you know, they're part of this, they're part of that. Oh, well, if they're not, you know, if they get pulled from there, or if they're having trouble, or we don't want to scare them off, or we don't want them to be church hurt or anything like that. So,
Yeah.
you know, but it's kind of one of those, like, you know, are we worried about the people, or are we going to worried about, you know,
Yeah.
the positions, you know, because I can
Yeah.
get somebody, I can fill in for them somewhere, you know, 10th grade ministry or whatever. I can do that while they're
Mhm.
getting help, while they're building their family back up.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, you know, it's a serious situation that the son heard them say the word divorce. You know, if they can't deal with it in such a way that, you know, they're throwing the word divorce around in front of their son, and that he's going to bring it to the church, you know, it's serious. You know, it's a serious situation, and they, you know, they have to understand, you know, their priority is their marriage, because, you know, the dissolution of their marriage will be harmful to their son, you know, and could affect him the rest of the life. And you know, I mean, you know, that kind of has to be almost a basis for serving in the church, is that, you know, when you need help, you're willing to get help. And, you know, and even if that means taking a break from what you're doing to get, you know, things established. And you know, and you don't know, I mean, because there could be some moral issue going on that also needs to be addressed, you know, because people aren't willy-nilly just gonna people that are serving in a church, the husband and wife are involved in serving in a church, aren't going to willy-nilly get a divorce unless there's something really serious going on. And, you know, that they need to be open about that, if they're going to be, especially if there's something going on with the husband and he's teaching a 10th grader class, you know, he may be doing something he shouldn't be teaching that class. You know, he needs to take a break and focus on getting help. But you know, I wouldn't accept that answer, you know, that this is a private matter, family matter, it should not concern the church. No, it does concern the church, because they are part of the church. All right. So setting an example for believers in family life. The family, we know, is in transition in our time. The traditional family with a mother and father who raise children is no longer the only possibility. The single parent home is becoming more prevalent even in the church. And that, you know, medical technology allows women who've never been married to have a child to raise him or her alone. Adoption, which has been with us a long time, presents another option for parents who want children but cannot conceive themselves. And because of the shrinking world, some of these adopted children come from other countries. But you know, we know that in today, gay and lesbian couples, you know, can mostly adopt. You know, there may be some agencies that will try to prevent that, but for most couples like that, their adoption is not a problem. There will be somewhere that they can adopt children. And so but we, you know, there is the epidemic of men that fail to fulfill their moral responsibilities to their families and force women to carry the bulk of the burden. And the purpose of this lesson is to consider the moral implications of the family. So we will start with the Bible, resource 18:1. And the Bible begins with a story about a family. God creates the first human and then says, "It is not good that the human should be alone. I'll make for him another human as his partner." Now typically they say God made man. But the term there is Adam, which means creature of the earth. And it's only secondary that gender comes into question or becomes the issue. But it does say that therefore a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife and they become one flesh, Genesis 2:24. But it is there is a significance here, male and female. The relationship between a man and woman is the place where much of life takes place. And it says, so God, in Genesis 1:27, God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And taken with the verses in Genesis 2, several things emerge. First, God creates humankind in his image. That is, he creates human beings for communion. Since the Christian faith teaches that God is triune, we understand that God is an everlasting communion. When God creates human beings in his image, that means humankind is a communion. Therefore, humankind, as the image of God in history, lives the way God lives, in communion. So that's it's the male and female in communion together that reflect the image of God. It's in relationship that we really reflect God's image. God is relational, and in it, made in his image, we are relational. We are relational beings. We were made for a relationship. Second, Adam and Eve, male and female, are human together. Since God made humankind for communion, it is unnatural for them to live alone or in isolated ways. After all, human beings learn to talk very early so that it is possible to share ideas and life. Third, we see, God made Adam and then God made Eve. God created the second human as something different. God didn't create a perfect copy of the first so that they would be alike in every way. Rather, God created something very different and very good. And even the terminology between God forming the man and God creating the woman, the terminology is very different in how they were made. And so that's another distinction there. So that this pattern of difference enriches life as it turns love into something other than idolatry. It is unnatural to love oneself or one's likeness in an end. There's an episode on the TV series Seinfeld where he dates someone that has his same sense of humor, has his same observations of life and everything. And he's so happy that he's what he's looked for all his life was himself. And he's fallen in love with himself. But after a time, he gets tired of that and realizes that he's not so thrilled with himself as he thought he was. He actually is annoyed by himself. Because it's unnatural to love yourself in one's likeness as an end. There's even an episode where George dates someone that looks like Jerry. And their neighbor Kramer thinks it's because, well, he's in love with Jerry, But God designed the female as the counterpart to the male in order to complete the creation. The pattern of the relationship of male and female mirrors God's love for the world. God loves the other as he reaches to the world through the Spirit, just as he calls humankind to love God as males and females. Fourth, the story of creation links sexual expression to the male-female relationship. After the creation of Eve, we read, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion." Genesis 1:28. Sexuality has become an idol in the modern West. Songs are written about it, and plays depict its many joys and pitfalls. The pattern God intends for human sexuality is between a man and a woman. All other forms of sexual expression are immoral because they violate God's intentions. The importance of covenantal responsibility demands that sexuality unfold in the boundary of commitment. Much of the story of God in the world can be told in the context of the family. God saved Noah and his family. In fact, the history of the Bible is in some measure the history of families. When God describes his blessing for Abraham and Sarah, he does so by talking about their many descendants. Time will not permit a full treatment of the family in the Old Testament, but it is essential to the very texture of the narratives of the faith. We know that Joseph saved Israel by saving his family. And the tribes of the settlement period are really families. And then Jesus was born into a family. And while there are certainly other examples, these suggest family is a primary category for moral consideration. Moving on to the New Testament, in Resource 18:2, we hear from Paul about what Paul said about the family. And Paul addresses the issue of the family in several places. And there's no place where he makes the concern for the family more vital than in Ephesians. The family is so constituted that it needs to be shaped by the general rule Paul sets forth regarding mutual subjection or submission. I prefer the term submission to subjection. Ephesians 5:21 sets the ontology, so to speak, for the family. Be subject to one another out of reverence for Christ, or submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And the way the family lives is the way life is to be lived in mutual submission. I really don't like I don't like this term here of subjection. I think it should be submission. Some would want to read this passage as little more than an anachronism. Surely Paul is either a male chauvinist or he's locked in a time when women were little more than property. Yet to read this passage as an argument that wives are to do what husbands say is unwarranted by the very words of the text. The issue Paul unfolds here is less about who is in charge than it is about how the husband and the wife are constituted into a living reality capable of fruitfulness and co-dominion. And there's, in this passage, it talks first about submitting one to another. And of course, then there's, even though it says wives submit to your husbands, there's this real strong emphasis about husbands are to love their wives as they love their own bodies, and to take care of the relationship like that. Paul quotes Genesis by suggesting that it's fitting that a man leave his father and mother to be joined to his wife. There's this book, I think it's called Love and Respect. And it suggests that the primary thing that men need or desire is respect, and the thing that women want is love. I think that can also be reversed. I think there's women that want respect and men that want love. So, but it's it's something to consider. But you can check on that book called Love and Respect. So the logic of this passage is stunning. First, everyone is to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Second, this includes wives being submissive to husbands to submit. Third, this also includes husbands loving their wives as Christ loved the church and as their own body. And, of course, Christ's love for the church meant he gave up his life. He died for the church. So it's a sacrificial kind of thing. And I've heard it said that if men will, love like this, that it's easier for them to want, to follow their lead, if they're willing to lay down their life like that. But in many cases, men are not prone to do that, and that leads to the problem. Fourth, because God created us to live in families, it is fitting that when the time comes, the man and the woman become a separate family. So the church is the bride of Christ, and his love for the church sanctifies it as a vehicle of salvation. The presence of the church shows to the world in very concrete ways that what God is up to in the world. The family is a place where each is subject to the other and each is loved to his or her own fulfillment. It is a place that shows the world that what God is doing. But the argument is even better than that, because Paul seems to be saying the family is the place where he begins the process of regenerating humanity. A healthy family is where people are sanctified for wholeness in the world. And the term, of course, sanctified means setting apart for God's purpose and glory. Paul calls this a great mystery, and then he applies it to Christ and the church. So Paul is primarily writing about how Christ loves the church in the passage, but the implications for the family are inescapable. One place of obvious importance is the authority. It seems obvious that Paul is teaching that husbands have authority over wives, yet such an interpretation is a serious misreading of the passage. One way to think of this is reflected in Romans 7:1-3. It says, "Do you not know, brothers and sisters, for I am speaking to those who know the law, that the law is binding on a person only during that person's lifetime. Thus, a married woman is bound by the law to her husband as long as he lives, but if her husband dies, she is discharged from the law concerning the husband. Accordingly, she will be called an adulteress if she lives with another man while her husband is still alive. But if her husband dies, she is free from that law. If she marries another man, she is not an adulteress." So this passage contrasts two ways of being in the world. One is bound to the law and its demands. From this point of view, authority presents itself as an unequivocal demand. Translated into family life, this means strict parameters or of authority apply. The other way suggested in the passage is that in Christ, the old way of thinking about authority has come to an end. This leads us to resource 18.3, authority of the family. And Carlos, would you read that? First paragraph.
This new way of understanding authority is not demand but love. Translated into family life, authority is understood in terms of mutually and love. Authority is no longer coercive, rather it is persuasive. What the law could not demand, a husband and wife will freely give. The family is not a place of obligation. The family is a place where love opens up lives in an atmosphere of mutual self-fulfillment. The family is also where children are formed in order that they might contribute to society and the church. Children need structure, and parents are responsible to prove it or provide it. Without structure and recognition of authority, a child will be lost in the ambiguity of moral decision making. Children are first taught to obey, so later they will be capable of exercising freedom.
Okay. Thank you. Hold right there. So put in very specific terms, the trash will be taken out not because somebody ordered it to be done, but out of love for the family and the need for it to be done. The early church was characterized by house churches. They were communities of Christians who shared the Lord's Supper, sang hymns, and prayed in various homes. Christians are urged to demonstrate their love for family and commitment to God by providing for their own family. To fail at this is to be worse than an unbeliever. Also, Paul is directing his words to children and parents. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. The ability to recognize appropriate authority remains an essential element of life. The first significant moral question a child faces should be a long way toward maturity. As you read, this means children are taught to obey, so later they will be capable of exercising freedom. Admittedly, raising children is difficult in our generation. Raising them effectively takes time and patience. Paul goes on to say, and fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Family life requires discipline on the part of parents. Sometimes the days will be long and seemingly thankless, but the patient discipline of godly parents is a moral imperative. I remember reading a book by Josh McDowell called How to Be a Hero to Your Kids. And he talked about the 6 A's of parenting. And it started with things like availability and affirmation. And then there's two others in the middle, but then the end of it is accountability and authority. And the whole premise of the book is that rules without relationship equals rebellion. That if you lay down the law, but you don't have a relationship with them, they're going to rebel. But if you build the relationship with availability and affirmation and the positive relational things, then it's easier to add in accountability and authority. And And some of that, it even implies being accountable to them, having accountability, even toward your children, that, if they really see a discrepancy in your life of like something you expect of them, but then it's, they need to be able to point that out, and say, you're telling me this, but you're also doing this, that's one that a lot of parents like, no, I would never, I'm the parent, I can't show any accountability to my kids, but if we're not living it, we need to humble ourselves and apologize to them that, what, I shouldn't have treated you like that, or I shouldn't have yelled at you like that, or I shouldn't expect this of you when I'm not really doing what I'm preaching. I'm telling you, do what I say, not what you see. So it's hard to want to to kind of humble ourselves like that, but but I think they're more likely to follow us if we do, and listen to us if we do. So the family is a place where each member becomes a steward of the resources entrusted to it. In other words, the family is a place where people learn to pull together, sacrifice for one another, and accomplish more together than they could alone. I think the family should be a place where the siblings are like rooting for each other. They're not competing, they're encouraging each other, they're rooting for each other. And parents are not comparing them and making them compete for their affection, that it would be easy for me I've got one child that I feel, I have a lot in common with, and another that in some ways I don't. But it doesn't mean that I, love one more than another. I may feel like I have a better relationship with one than some of the others. But I still, try to reach out to all my children and build that relationship with them, even as they're adults. So spiritual leadership, what I just read on here is that spiritual leadership is necessary for this to happen. As the family learns stewardship, it becomes the place where leadership is given to the church and to society. And it should not go without notice that Paul places these words in the midst of the broader concerns of the Christian life. Thus, his message to the church at Ephesus is the same as the message for the church today. Family is part of the way God intends to form people. So, pastors might get into, this kind of dichotomy of, I have the church and I have the family, and not realize that, their family is part of the church and, deserves as much attention as the church does. It's a false kind of thing to think, well, the church is more important because that's about God and that's about spiritual and all that kind of stuff, and not realize that that's exactly what you have with your family. Your family is a smaller facet of the church as a whole, of the body of Christ as a whole. And you shouldn't have to choose between one or the other. But there should be a priority to that family, because how that goes will determine how the church goes. And If that suffers, then the church suffers. You know, so we can't ever let the church push our family away. We need to see our family as part of the church. All right, so moving on to moral family and moral reflection. Resource 18.4, a survey of the place of the family in the Bible suggests its importance. The two major moral theories treated in this module provide some evidence of the importance of the family. We have already considered Aristotle in this lesson, as well as on virtue ethics. If morality is fostered in association, then the health of one's family is one predictor of virtue. A child is shown how to live by the example set by parents and even older siblings. If Aristotle is right, then the virtue is born in the active engagement of family life. Perhaps the primary place for moral reflection is the family. Deontological theories of moral reflection are not concerned with virtues that arise from associations like the family. Rather, deontological theories suggest there is an oughtness about family responsibility. The categorical imperative sets forth the universal necessity of attending to the family, not because of its results, but because it is the right thing to do. Therefore, if a husband and wife decide to have children, they have a moral duty to provide the environment for healthy growth. Ethics is disciplined reflection on the formation of a healthy character and its relationship to virtuous action. Character is formed in a family, and virtuous action is first learned in the family. No one would suggest that the family is the only place to build character and virtue. Yet the very best place to learn how to be moral is the family. We come back here to, now we move on to resource 18.5, the pastor and family. And pastoral ministry is a 24/7 proposition. A pastor never truly goes on vacation or fully relaxes. There's always a fear that while I'm gone, something bad is going to happen. You know, someone's going to die, and I'm going to need to come back to do the funeral. Or, somebody's going to try to do something while I'm gone. They're going to try to boot me out or vote me out or do something while I'm not there, or, try to replace me. So often the telephone rings in the home of the pastor to call him or her to some immediate crisis. Suffering and human need do not fit neatly on the schedule. I did 2 funerals in the middle of VBS one summer. And we thought we were going to have to take down all the decorations and put them back up. But thankfully, both the families of both people said they wanted the decorations left up. Because that person loved children and loved, children's ministry. They were, a kid at heart. But that was a lot to try to navigate, trying to have a VBS and 2 funerals at the same time. So as it is, a pastor needs to stand ready to serve, but the family should not be allowed to become a routine second on the agenda. Work cannot be allowed to become more important than family. And I had to make conscious efforts to say this, this is my day of rest. This is my day of recreation. And this is my day of doing something with my children, and really making effort not to try to do anything else during that time. I had to really guard that. And so that the pastor needs to model Christian discipline in the way he or she makes room for the family. Therefore, it is essential that the pastor makes time for the family. There is no excuse for routinely not spending time with the greatest gift a pastor can receive, a family. The pastor's commitment to family should be public. This will show others in the congregation how to maintain family. I also have some notes here about the importance of a healthy marriage, and some things to do about that is to decide from day one that marriage is important and difficult. And in other words, success in marriage does not just happen. It says here to listen to one another, try to understand one another, be honest in the context of love, take time for one another, and make Christ the center of the marriage. Now, the argument for the priority of family life begins with understanding how crucial it is for children to have an environment of trust. This environment begins with parents who love one another in practical ways for children to observe. A healthy family will not be an exclusive clan. And this guy, Josh McDowell, one thing he said was he always told his children how much he loved their mother. Or if he was calling and he was talking to them, he would say, now, would you put that woman I love on the phone, which is their mother. So he was always, and of course, he would like to give his wife a big kiss in front of the kids to get their, reaction. But it was also just, for them to see they really do love each other. There's affection, for each other. That's one of the A's. There's affection, affirmation, and availability. And then, so a healthy family will not be an exclusive clan, rather it will be open for receiving friends and neighbors. A healthy family does not cling to its members. The true test of a healthy family is the ability to let go and bless the children as they start families on their own. Good families are a result of discipline, commitment, and church. Paul describes the church as a body, an organic whole that, while including differences, is finally one. Therefore, the church, as the family of God, teaches its families how to be together in difference. When we come to church, we cannot all talk at the same time. We cannot sing only the songs we most like. We cannot all sit in the same seat at the same time. The church teaches us to focus on what matters, the worship of God. Strong churches engender strong families. Weak churches result in divided families. Bringing one's family to church is one way to keep the family strong. And, I think, pastors have and leaders of churches have to determine, are we demanding too much from the families? Are we asking for too much time? Are we demanding too much to where it is hurtful to the family? There has to be, a good deal of understanding of what people are going through that are, working full-time jobs, and maybe their kids are active in other things. And then, how much, can they spend in church-related activity? All right, so now we go on to lessons best learned at home. And most lessons in life that have moral significance come with some measure of pain. It is not easy to do the right thing in the fallen world into which we have been thrown. Therefore, the best place to learn some of these lessons is that list on resource 18.6.
You froze, brother.
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I good now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah, that, if you could read that list on resource 18.6.
You want me to read it, brother?
Yes, please.
Okay, sure. Lessons best learned at home. It is not always going to go my way. I am important, but I am not the only one. It is important to share. I can trust those who are older than me. There is a place to run when things get tough. Sometimes I need to say, forgive me. Sometimes rules mean freedom. I matter to someone. Life goes on. Integrity matters. Sexuality has its place.
Yeah, and there are many other lessons that we can learn at home. All right, thank you. So, closing thoughts here are about the changing family. And so, we know that all the discussions about gay marriage have centered on the definition of marriage and family, or, you know, a redefinition. And what's taken place in the Supreme Court and what's taken place in the Congress. You know, traditionally, marriage has been defined as a union between a man and a woman. Therefore, traditionally, the family has been understood as a mother and a father raising their children. The escalation of divorce around the world began to change family to at least one adult and one child. The number of children raised in single-parent homes is on the rise. And remarriage after divorce has resulted in the blended family. And we know that the effort was one to legalize marriage between you know, gay and lesbian couples. And this has changed once again the nature of the family. So, you know, some families have two dads, some families have two moms now. And so the question is, how do you define marriage? How do you define family? How does the church reach out to the families that come through the door? You know, going on from there, what should the response be to a gay couple who wants to worship at your church? What would Jesus do? How much does God love these individuals? How do we reach out to the children who come from homes where mixed messages of morality are taught? Anybody want to respond to any of that? Not easy things to answer.
And I don't have a specific other than just to keep being reminded and like have a picture in your mind of how Jesus loved the sinners, didn't love the sin, but to not judge, to not hold them at arm's length, but to also be honest with them. We had at our church a lesbian couple who brought their son, and he went to our school, elementary school. And so there was this long discussion with them of what the son would be taught, what we believe biblically about a marriage, you know, between a man and a woman. And they attended, they used to actually sit behind Terry and I. They attended for, I don't know, a couple months or so, and then they just disappeared. But Pastor CB had talked to them just very candidly, lovingly. This is what's going to be preached. You still love them. I mean, you want to know that to me, it's no different than any other couple living in sin. It's just more visible for the whole world to see, and they're not repentant because they don't think that it's wrong. There are people that are in the pews, the pulpit, I mean, in the pews all day long who are living in sin. It's just private. And then when you find out about it, do you kick them out? Do you not love them anymore? No. So I think it is a difficult thing. It's just this very public thing that it is a sexual sin. I personally think it's a perversion, a type of sin to think that's natural. But that's what they're convinced. It's from a deceiving spirit. And so you still have to love them. I don't know how you show that in a way. And this is where I think that I'm getting probably way too detailed, where the church has to have strict policy and guidelines so that if there is a gay couple that wants to start coming, what if they have adopted a child and the child has been taught at home that's the way, that's a couple, that's the way to live, that's good, and now they're in with all your other children and saying things you don't want to be. I mean, so it raises all of this stuff up. You're not going to put them in leadership. I mean, so I just think that there's some things. How do you love them? What would Jesus do? What did he do when he saw people? He didn't have them in his inner circle, but he still proclaimed truth to them. He still healed them. He still offered freedom. He still, if he was able to cast out demons, if that was a stronghold, he did, all that. I don't have the answer. I'm just rambling, but I'm glad I'm not in that position where I played that through right now.
Yeah. I mean, some people want to make the fact that Jesus never directly said something about homosexuality, to mean that he didn't care about that or didn't, or would be okay with it. Because, they'll say, well, Jesus, Paul's the only one that ever mentioned it. Jesus never said anything about it, but Jesus did positively affirm, the biblical traditional idea of marriage, and, part of the reality is where Jesus was, that was not as prevalent as it was outside of, Israel. It was, Paul encountered it more as he went to the wider Roman world, and of course there's nothing of that time period that is similar to what we have today. There wasn't, there might have, there was homosexuality in that time, but that there wasn't the idea of two people getting married and having family. It's not exactly the same concept, but that, but you have to go back to creation. You have to go back to intention, and what was God's intention, from creation. And is this a twisting or a corruption of God's intention? And we believe that is. We don't, but and that, just like anyone bound in any kind of sin we first, have a burden for them. We have compassion for them, because when we're in bondage to something, we're usually in some kind of deception, and we want God to awaken them and shine a light to come to the truth and trust that God, whatever God calls you to, God will enable you. If he calls you to marriage, to someone of the opposite sex, if he calls you to singleness and being celibate, he will empower you to do that, and there will be as much, joy in that as there is in anything else, because, in this life, in this world, we're hung up on sexuality. That won't be an issue in the next life. There won't be a concern about that. So for the shortness of this life, we think we're like all consumed by it, but for eternity, it doesn't compare. That this will all pass away. Everything will become new. But I think definitely there has to be that compassion and love, and we can't we can't operate out of fear. We don't need to be afraid just because someone is doing what they're doing. I'm not afraid of gay people. And I know Jesus, Jesus wouldn't be afraid of them. But it's it doesn't mean it's not a challenge, and we cannot know for sure how much people are struggling with an issue like this. That we don't know how much people in the congregation are struggling with that. When it comes to the children and teenagers, there could be many that are struggling with gender identity, sexuality, all these things, and we never want to poke fun at it or make a joke about it. We should take it very seriously, but take it very compassionately. And can't just say, well, that's not, because I don't accept it, that means it's not real to them. We have to realize it, for them, it is real. It's a real thing, and we should take it seriously. We may not accept it or fully believe that, but there's something going on there that needs counseling and care and wisdom. All right, so we have attempted to articulate the importance of the family for the moral life, understand the ethical theories and how they teach and nurture ethical behavior in the Christian community, discern and make theologically informed decisions in the midst of a complex and or paradoxical context, understand and apply the unique ethical dimensions of spiritual leadership in the church, and practice faithful stewardship of personal relations, including marriage and family. And the next lesson will begin the final, and the next session will be the final unit of the module. And the theme for the next session will be character development and spiritual formation. The next lesson will explore the connection between character development, spiritual formation, and morality. The homework is to write a 2 to 3 page essay on the important lessons in morality learned at home. Read and write a paragraph response to resource 18.7 and make a journal entry that engages the material of this lesson. And I'll close with that. So, all right, we'll resume next week. It'll be our last meeting together. And I pray you have a great weekend. Good services on Sunday if you're in services. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you, brother.
Good deal.
Have
Have a
great
good
weekend, everybody.
rest of the week.
Thank you.
Good luck
You
on
too.
interviews if you have interviews coming up.
Oh, yeah.
And I had mine Thursday, so
Oh,
or no, I had mine Wednesday afternoon. I
okay.
did mine via Zoom, so
Okay.
How'd it go? Did they trip you up again?
no, it was myself, Zach, Dr. Downs, and Corey Jones,
Okay.
and surprisingly, it wasn't too bad. I was like, at first I was a little nervous, but it kind of everything flowed together. So,
Are you going to be ordained this next time? Are you
No.
close? Okay.
No, I am far from it.
Okay.
Far from it.
You
I'm
got-
probably
you-
I started late too, so I know hopefully Stephanie's done by next year, so she'll get ordained next year.
That'll be a reason
hopefully.
to celebrate. Yeah, that's
Oh, yeah.
great.
So,
So Robert, are you interviewing up at Northside? Are you coming up or?
Yeah, I'll
Or
be coming
you-
to Fort Worth, where we're meeting this time. Yeah,
Yeah, Northside.
yeah. I'll be up on Tuesday.
Okay.
I always get them confused. I'm still trying to place which church is where.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll take you a
Yeah,
little bit from where you are to get up there because you have to come straight up 35. So I don't know what time your appointment is, but give yourself extra time.
Yeah, I think it's at 1. We're planning on leaving probably around 11:30.
No, it's north of Fort Worth.
North side of Fort Worth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Literally in Watauga.
oh, okay.
Who to what?
Watauga?
Bless you, brother. Watauga. Okay.
Watauga.
It's easy to find. It's just all that freeway stuff that you never know
Right.
Right.
when you get into
I
town.
got you.
Mhm.
We will leave early. Thank you for that. Appreciate that.
Well,
heads
yeah,
up.
even if you got up there early, you can always go get a cup of coffee or something, but to get up there close to it.
So this is a different church than they had last year.
No, they had the interviews at Northside last year.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay.
So it's the same
Had to
place
get
it's
to it.
in if that's where you went. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Thank you.
Yeah, they have a
Yeah, I
nice,
didn't think it was that hard to get to. What's that, brother?
Bed
coffee
bud.
house. They put in a nice coffee house in their church.
Oh,
Ooh,
cool.
Nice. Man, I'm
I
jealous I'm
remember
not
seeing
going.
It's called Grounded.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
They have a meaning for it.
Yeah, it has the double meaning of grounded like coffee and also grounded in, Christ.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
It's perfect. I love
Yeah.
duality in that frame.
Yeah. It's cool. It's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent.
Well, I'll
Did
pray.
anybody go to the sabbatical this weekend?
What's that?
Anyone going to the shepherd sabbatical this weekend?
Mm.
I'm not, no.
No, I
No,
got to
you're
work
late.
this weekend. So
Yeah, with you being a lead pastor too, that you need to go, Robert, and meet everybody.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm actually covering for Pastor Larry Clayson. Clausen, I'm not sure
Cool.
how you pronounce his last name. That's up at Gainesville East Side.
Oh, good.
So he'll be at the
Shepherd Sabbath.
Shepherd Sabbath. Yeah.
We'll keep you in our prayers. We know you'll give a great message.
Oh, thank you.
I know my brothers will be there. Corey and Chad.
Oh, I didn't know Corey was your brother.
My younger.
Yeah.
And Chad's my youngest.
I took a Old Testament class with him right after he, I think he wasn't he here in like 96, 97? Is that when he started? Or was it
Corey?
98? Yeah.
Oh, where'd you take it? He taught or you took one together?
No, I thought he was teaching one. Maybe I've got my Corey's mixed up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't remember.
What church is he at?
Crossroads Tabernacle?
Okay, all right.
That's
Different Corey. Sorry, brother.
okay. He's Fort Worth.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
you need to get your app on your phone of the directory for the West Texas.
yeah,
And so
Got the
you can look at
directory,
every
got it.
picture and you'll know every one of them by name and just go up like you've known them forever and just.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah, that's the thing. Everybody says, "Who's that guy with that long beard? What's his deal?"
Yeah.
They're going to figure you out real quick. So you need to get.
I went to the meeting there in Charlotte, and if I had one guy say it to me, I must have had 5 or 6 say, "What are you trying to be, ZZ Top?" I said, "Only if I can have their I can't sing like them and I can't play like them, but I can do a lot with their money."
yeah.
You're just trying to be like Moses or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, well, maybe in about 10 or 15 years. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, though that every time you say that, I think of that beard that Charlton Heston sported for the movie Moses.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Long thing. So anyway, yeah. Well, cool. Well, I hope you guys all have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Yeah, you too.
God bless. Good night.
Blessings, everybody. See y'all later.